when I decided to become a part. He was just an anointed speaker, and he just drew you to him, and he was just, to me, seemed to just be a kind, humble man, low key, and but he had a lot of authority about him. It was just something. I mean, all the men who worked with him and the women, they were very intelligent and smart and eloquent, just as he was. But he just stood out. He stood out, and my first time meeting him was when I was arrested on Good Friday, 1963. And when we got to the jail, he and uh, uh, Reverend Ralph Abernathy, I was his chief aide, and they were close. When you saw one, you saw the other. And so they were standing out there waiting to go in the jail. And I was recently out of college, and there were a lot of college students, a lot of young ladies who had gotten arrested. And we saw Dr. King, and we started running, Dr. King, Dr. King. And we all grabbed him to embrace him, and he was just smiling, oh, Dr. King. And then I noticed that nobody was speaking to Reverend Abernathy, so I've always been a person who liked the underdog. So I said, Reverend Abernathy is my man. And I started embracing him, and then some of the ladies started embracing uh, uh, him also. And he was just a kind, soft-spoken, low-key man. He wasn't that tall. He was less than 6 feet. He was like 5 feet something, maybe 5 feet 8 or 9 or something like that. And he always wore this black suit and a dark tie. That's the only way I ever saw him. And then we were able to talk with them for a while. But the greatest experience that I had was that we were in jail Good Friday. And so that Sunday morning, we heard his voice. He was preaching, and we were in the women's wing. And so they were out in the courtyard. I think the jailers, they were preaching Easter sunrise service, and they put him out in the rain. And we heard him, but we couldn't see them. And so the room that I was in, it was just big room with all the prisoners in there. And so the windows were way up. And so I climbed up on the shoulders. I scaled the wall. Some of the ladies picked me up. And I looked out there in the courtyard, and he was out there preaching. And that was an experience that I'll never forget on Easter Sunday morning. And then when we got out of jail, I remember he came up to me and asked me if I would represent the group, to speak for the group concerning my experience in jail. So those were the times that I remember that I had close contact with him. But I was in his midst, weekly at the weekly meetings that were held at the 16th Street Baptist Church, where the little girls were killed. So those are my experiences with him on a personal level. But my brother was his driver. He picked him up from the airport each time he came, and he took him back to the airport. So he was one of his aides.
So I imagine at this time, just with everything that was going on, there's a lot of fear of people doing extreme things. Like there was a church bombing, so this wasn't like just some people trying to intimidate you. This was like serious business. People were dying.
Oh yes, definitely. And they had the dogs and the water hose. It was serious business. That's why, a lot of people, they were for it, but they weren't brave enough to participate. And the thing about it, if you participated, you had to sign a paper saying that you ascribe to their methods, non-violence. If somebody hit you, you couldn't hit them back or whatever. And some people said, well, I can't do that, because if anybody hits me, I'm going to hit them back. Because my brother was in Woolworths demonstrating, and a white man came up to him and spit in his face. And my brother, he just turned around and smiled and said, God bless you. So that was all he could do. And so I was in a situation where we were at the 16th Street Baptist Church, and we were gonna go downtown in March, and so somebody had alerted the police, and we got across the park, right across from the church, and they were standing there, arms locked, the policemen, a long line, and had their billy clubs drawn back and said, if you come, we're gonna knock you out. And so we stopped. And then all of a sudden, I know that was God, something hit me, and I rushed the police officers, and they turned to hit me in the head, and I was waiting for that lick. But when I rushed them, then everybody else rushed them, and so they turned and didn't hit me. But that was a miracle to me, because I ran toward them, and
Right.
they had the billy clubs up, and then we got past them, and this was another miracle. They turned the water hose on us, and I ran through a parking lot, and I was waiting to get knocked down. The water was denting up cars, knocking out car windows, and I'm just running, and it never knocked me down. So I
Wow.
knew that was that was a miracle. But
Yeah.
so it was pretty rough. We had a lot of bad experiences, and the leader in Birmingham, Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, he ended up in the hospital. He I saw this happen when they turned the water hose on him and knocked him down. They were so forceful, it put him in the hospital. And like I said, they were bombing houses, and they drove through my neighborhood, armed white men, until one night the community got together and they said they were going to be ready for them. So that night when they drove through there, the black people started shooting.
Oh,
Pow,
wow.
pow. And you heard tires screeching, and they never came back.
You know, came back.
Yeah, but they would be up around my brother's house. He came down there one night to get my dad. He said they were, driving around his house. So it was a very, very frightening period, and a lot of things happened.
I know growing up myself, it was always very difficult for me to watch the videos and films of the civil rights era, and just always thought, that it was just kind of hard to watch. It was really hard to watch and to see that, and you get, I personally would get really angry, like,
Yes.
not at the people for not fighting back, because I understood why they were not fighting back, but just angry at people who, should have known better.
Right.
But it seems to me that the impact of being nonviolent was that parts of America that never saw how African Americans were treated, got a chance to see just the brutality that was directed against people, and it made a difference in things moving forward.
Right.
Is that kind of how it felt at the time, or did it feel like it was working when you were going through it?
Yeah, well, we were determined that weren't gonna stop until we saw it work. It was difficult. There were some difficult moments, because the more we moved forward, they said that they were determined that things weren't going to change. But when we start hitting them in the pocketbook, people really stopped riding the buses. They would have private drivers agree to take people to work and pick them up. And so when people really got with it, and it was hitting them in the pocketbook, that kind of got their attention. And then, like I said, miraculous things began to happen. Like, we had a choir, and we used to sing every Monday night. And so the director, who was a close friend of mine, one night we were singing the song, Go Tell It on the Mountain. And there were verses that says, I would not be Book Hunter. That was the city commissioner. I tell you the reason why. I'm afraid my Lord may call me, and I wouldn't be ready to die. So they just called the names of a lot of the officials.
Right.
And so then he ended the song. I'll never forget this. He ended the song, and then all of a sudden he started it back up. And he said, I would not be Judge Brown. And that was the judge who was convicting us. We get out of jail, we go through the courts,
Right.
and he was finding everybody guilty, 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 guilty. He said, I would not be Judge Brown. I'll tell you the reason why. I'm afraid my Lord may call me, and I wouldn't be ready to die. And that next morning, after he got off the bench, Judge Brown fell dead
Is that right?
at City Hall. Yes,
Oh,
he
wow.
did. And I remember a judge replaced him by the name of Judge Jenkins, and he was a very short guy, and he was sitting on the bench, and all I remember when I would go through the court, see his eyes, he was scared. His eyes were like 50-cent pieces,
Oh, wow.
Judge Jenkins, and he was letting everybody go. Not guilty, not guilty. He was frightened. And so we kept it up. And Reverend Shuttlesworth, he was the inspiration behind a lot of this, and he said, I'm not going to give up. And sure enough, after a while, the demands that we had made, that was 6 different things that we wanted. And so they gave up. We kind of like broke their backs economically.
Right.
And so, there were times when you thought it wouldn't work, but you were so determined that we were in it for the long haul, because it was pretty devastating. It was pretty frightening. And what happened, as more people went to jail and we would come to the meeting and share our experiences, then more people started going, even the children. Kids were leaving school, going. My brother Dwight, who was 15 at the time, he left school and he stayed in jail 7 days. And the officials would call the parents to frighten the parents, say, your child over here crying. But by that time, my mother, who was against me going, she had become convinced.
Right.
She wanted to go. So like the kids were going, and the jails were just overcrowded. See, they didn't expect us to hold out that long.
Right.
And so when things got so bad, like I said, in jail, they put us in there with the criminals. And then another time I was in jail, they put us in a room with no bed, a bed with no mattress, just springs on the bed. And they just did all kinds of things to intimidate us. And they put us in solitary confinement, nothing in the room, but you had to sleep on the concrete floor. But it didn't work. People were determined. And that's what I said earlier. There's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. The time had come that things were going to change. And so we persevered. We persevered. And we trust God, and we believe God, and He brought us out, Stephen.
So one of my favorite, I don't know how I would kind of describe it, but the letter from the jail, from Birmingham jail, that Martin Luther King wrote.
Yes.
And in that letter, it talks about it basically takes religious leaders, white religious leaders, to task for saying, well, just wait and be patient.
That's right.
Right. And Dr. King was adamant that the time for waiting was done.
That's right.
And it was time to make a difference.
Right. And he wrote a book called Why We Can't Wait.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, because he had left Birmingham, then he had to come back and serve time. But I remember that a newspaper article where all the prominent white ministers had put an ad in the paper and signed their names. It was a long list of them saying why it's not time, why you shouldn't be doing that. So that's what prompted that letter that he wrote, in that book that he subsequently wrote, Why We Can't Wait, Yeah, but they were adamant that this is the wrong time. But thank God that we didn't listen to that. We were determined, people's minds were made up. Because we had, some of the leaders had tried to do this previously, but it didn't work. But after they got in touch with Dr. King, it was really time. It was really time.
And he was the right person.
Yeah, he was chosen because Reverend Shuttlesworth, who was the head of the group that brought him there, he said, and this is in a book, and I can share it because I have a book that one of my brothers sent me and Reverend Shuttlesworth just shared his thoughts. He